All right, today we are diving into a really fundamental shift in how we lead, how we make decisions. We're talking about moving from just reacting to what's already happened to actually predicting the future. We're going to unpack the tools that turn simple hindsight into powerful foresight. Let's jump right in. This quote just nails a trap that is so easy to fall into. We spend so much time looking at historical reports, right? Last quarter's sales, last week's numbers. That's your rearview mirror. And don't get me wrong, it's absolutely essential for knowing where you've been. But if it's the only thing you're looking at, well, you're basically driving blind to whatever's coming up right in front of you. And this right here, this is the strategic pivot we're talking about. Hindsight, that rearview mirror, is all about descriptive analytics. It's great at answering the question, what happened? But foresight, looking through the windshield, that's where predictive analytics comes in. It helps us answer what will happen. And that is the game-changing shift from being reactive to being proactive. It gives you the power to see challenges and opportunities before they even arrive. So what is predictive analytics, really? At its core, it's using the data you already have to find these hidden connections, these relationships between variables. But the goal isn't just to observe things, it's to forecast what's coming next, and, this is the critical part, to calculate the likelihood of specific things happening. I mean, knowing there's a 75% chance you're going to have a stock out next week, that is infinitely more valuable than a report that just tells you it already happened yesterday. Okay, before we get into all the nuts and bolts, we have to pause and understand the one single idea that all of this is built on. It's this. Every bit of quantitative forecasting operates on the fundamental assumption that the future will, in some mathematical way, look like the past. You see, if the patterns in our data are totally random, if there's no consistency, then all the fancy math in the world isn't going to help us. This assumption, this is the bedrock. So here's our game plan for today. We've just covered the windshield mindset. Next, we'll look at the two main forecasting engines you can use. Then we're going to step into what we're calling the chef's kitchen to see how one of them works. After that, we'll break down the blueprint of reality, the actual formula, and we'll wrap up with the most important rule for making sure your predictions are built on solid ground. Okay, first up, the what of forecasting. When you decide to build a predictive model, you come to a fork in the road. You have to choose between two very different mathematical engines, and getting this choice right is absolutely crucial. To make it simple, we're going to use an analogy: the chef and the clock. So here's that fundamental choice. On one side, you have causal models, which we're calling the chef. This approach assumes that an outcome, let's say a delicious meal, depends entirely on its specific ingredients. On the other side, you have time series models, or the clock. This one ignores all the external ingredients and simply predicts the next tick based on the rhythm of all the past ticks. Now, both of these are incredibly powerful, but if you really want to understand what drives your business outcomes, you have to start in the chef's kitchen. So for the rest of our time today, we are focusing squarely on causal models. All right, so let's step inside that kitchen. The main tool our chef uses to figure out exactly how different ingredients affect the final dish is called regression. This is the magic that lets us move beyond just intuition and gut feelings and into a world of hard, evidence-based strategy, because it lets us identify the true drivers of our business outcomes. We usually start with something called linear regression, and you can think of that like having a single motion sensor on your front door. Yeah, it gives you some information, but it's a pretty limited view of what's happening. To get a real, high-definition picture, we need to upgrade to multiple regression. This is like installing a full home security system with sensors on every single door and window. It gives you a complete, comprehensive view, letting us see how a whole bunch of different factors are all influencing our outcome at the same time. Okay, we're going to slow things way down for a minute here, because to build these incredibly powerful models, we really need to understand their algebraic blueprint. I know it might look a little intimidating at first, but trust me, this formula is actually just a very elegant story about the relationships hiding in your data. And this is it. That's the blueprint for a straight line. It's the foundational formula for simple linear regression. Every single part of this little equation has a specific job to do, and once you get what they are, you can literally read the story your data is trying to tell you. So let's break it down, piece by piece. First up, we have y. That's the dependent variable. Honestly, this is the whole reason we're even doing the analysis. It's the outcome, the target, the one thing we really want to predict or understand. In our chef analogy, y is the final dish. In the business world, this could be anything from sales revenue to fuel consumption to employee performance scores. It's the metric that matters most. Okay, next up is x, the independent variable. This is our ingredient. It's the factor, the feature, the input that we believe has an influence on our outcome, Y. This is the lever we can pull, or the variable we can measure. So for Y is sales revenue, our X might be how much we spend on advertising. If Y is fuel consumption, X could be the cargo weight. Now we get to M, the coefficient. From a strategy perspective, this is arguably the most important number in the whole equation. You'll also hear it called the slope. And what it does is it quantifies the power of an ingredient. It tells you exactly how much your outcome, Y, changes for every 1 unit increase in your input, X. So a coefficient of 5.0 for your social media spend means every single dollar you invest there generates $5 in revenue. This is the key to figuring out where to put your resources. And finally, there's B, the constant, or the intercept. This one's pretty simple. It's just the baseline value of Y. It's the starting point before you add any of your ingredients. So if we're predicting sales, the intercept is the amount of sales we'd expect to get if we spent $0 on advertising. It's the foundation that all our other variables build on top of. Okay, so now we have our blueprint. But the most elegant formula in the world is completely useless. And frankly, it can be really dangerous if it isn't built on a reliable foundation. And that brings us to what I personally believe is the single most important rule in all of predictive modeling. This is the critical question every single analyst has to ask themselves. We're using data from the past to make bets on the future, so the stakes are pretty high. How much data do we actually need before we can feel confident that the patterns we're seeing are real and not just some random statistical noise? Well, the answer, as a fundamental rule of thumb, is this number, 30. And this isn't just some arbitrary numbers somebody pulled out of a hat. It's a critical threshold for establishing what we call statistical reliability. This is the rule of 30. For a model to have enough statistical power to separate a true signal from just random noise, you need a sample size, we call it N, of at least 30 observations. The best analogy I've ever heard is a restaurant review. Think about it. You would never trust a 5-star rating if it only had 2 reviews, right? That could just be the owner's mom and dad. But once you have a crowd of 30 or more reviews, all the random outliers and individual biases, they start to cancel each other out. You can finally start to trust that the rating reflects the true quality of the restaurant. And this brings us to a really common point of confusion, so I want to be super clear here. The rule of 30 is all about statistical reliability. It's about the validity of your model's conclusions. This is completely different from what you might call technical tolerance. Your software, like Excel, might be able to technically run a forecast with very little data, but that's just a software function. It has absolutely no bearing on whether the result is statistically sound. For a model you can actually trust, you need a sample size of at least 30, period. So what happens if you ignore this rule? Well, the dangers of using what we call thin data are pretty severe. First, your model is going to fail to tell the difference between a real pattern and just random chance. This leads to models that are incredibly volatile and unstable, where the numbers can swing wildly if you add just 1 or 2 new data points. And ultimately, this results in making really confident but dangerously flawed business decisions based on a foundation of pure statistical noise. And that brings us to our final thought for today. As you go back and look at the analytics happening in your own organization, I want you to ask yourself this question. Are you trying to identify the ingredients that actually drive your business, or are you just watching the clock? Because choosing the right engine, that is the very first step toward having true, reliable foresight.